Welcome to Unlocking Passion. Men Report. Let's begin with a new story. Richard Holloway stood in front of the glass door of what should have been Phuket Property Partners, the investment firm where he had placed $400,000 of his life savings. The office was empty, not just closed for the day, completely empty. No furniture, no computers, no files, only bare walls and dust on the floor, visible through the glass. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and called June's number for the 47th time that week. It went straight to a message in Thai that he could not understand. He tried her email, her Line account, her Facebook profile. Everything was either disconnected or deleted. Rick stood there in the Thai midday heat. Sweat poured down his face, and he felt his legs grow weak. Frick! 3 weeks earlier, he had transferred $400,000 to that company. June had shown him this exact office, introduced him to lawyers, shown him contracts and land documents. How could all of it simply disappear? But, as devastating as that moment was, standing in front of an empty office and realizing that he had been defrauded of his entire retirement savings, Rick had no idea that the worst was still ahead. The money was gone, yes. But June had taken something else too, something that would turn Rick from a victim into a suspect and almost destroy what was left of his life. To understand how Rick Holloway ended up here, we have to go back 10 months to a networking dinner at a beach restaurant in Phuket, where Rick first met the woman who would systematically dismantle his entire existence. If you enjoy the stories I create, please remember to hit the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me find time to create these videos, despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. Richard Holloway had spent 30 years building his real estate agency in Phoenix, Arizona. He had started with nothing, a newly licensed realtor in his 20s, cold calling potential clients, showing houses in the brutal Arizona heat, and working 7 days a week to make a name for himself in a competitive market. By 40, Rick owned his own agency, with several agents working under him. By 50, he had 3 offices in Phoenix and Scottsdale. By every measure, he was successful. A 6-figure income, a comfortable house, respect in his community. His private life had been less successful. He had married young, a woman named Sandra, who became increasingly bitter about his long working hours. They had no children, which Rick regretted, but Sandra seemed relieved. The marriage ended when Rick was 47, a quiet divorce without drama, but also without real sadness. They had simply grown apart. After the divorce, Rick threw himself even deeper into work. He went on occasional dates, but nothing serious. He told himself he was married to his business, that success was enough. But at 60, after 30 years of relentless work, Rick woke up one morning and realized that he was exhausted. Exhausted by stress, by competition, by the constant hustle. He looked at his life, no wife, no children, no hobbies except work, and decided that it was time for a change. He sold his real estate agency in December 2023 for $1.2 million. After taxes and paying off his last business debts, Rick walked away with $900,000. Together with his existing savings and investments, he had about $1 million, enough to retire comfortably anywhere in the world. Rick had always loved Thailand. He had vacationed there twice, once in his 30s and once in his 50s, and had fallen in love with the beaches, the food, the relaxed pace of life, and the friendly people. He had read articles about American retirees living in Thailand for a fraction of what they would spend in the United States. $1 million could last for decades if he handled it wisely. In January 2024, Rick booked a 3-month exploratory trip to Thailand. He wanted to see whether he could actually live there, not just vacation there. He flew to Bangkok, spent a few days adjusting to the heat and the chaos, and then took a flight to Phuket, the island he had loved during his earlier visits. Rick rented a villa in Nai Harn Beach for several thousand baht per month, about several $100s. It was beautiful. 2 bedrooms, a pool, walking distance to the beach. In Phoenix, a comparable property would cost $5,000 a month. Rick immediately felt that he had made the right decision. He spent his first weeks settling in, exploring Phuket, and meeting other expats in different bars and restaurants. The expat community was large and diverse. British, Germans, Scandinavians, Australians, and many Americans. Most were retirees like Rick, although some were younger digital nomads or business owners. Rick joined an expat networking group that met monthly at a beach restaurant in Patong. These dinners attracted 50 to 70 people. Expats, business owners, real estate developers, and locals who worked with foreigners. At the 3rd dinner Rick attended, at the end of February, he met June. She was not what he had expected from a Thai woman at these events. Most of the Thai women present were wives or girlfriends of expat men, often much younger than their partners. June was different. She was sitting wearing professional clothes, a tailored blazer, and fabric trousers, and having a serious conversation with 2 European men about real estate law when Rick first noticed her. During the social part of the evening, Rick found himself next to her at the bar. She smiled politely, but did not approach him romantically or flirtatiously. Instead, she handed him a business card. Phichaya Tonglaw was written on the card. Real estate consultant, Phuket, Property Partners. "You work in real estate?" Rick asked, genuinely interested. "In a way," June said in perfect English with only a slight accent. "I help foreigners navigate Thai real estate law. Many people come here wanting to invest, and they get scammed because they do not understand the restrictions, or they trust the wrong people." Rick was immediately intrigued. Here was a Thai woman who was not trying to charm him or impress him. She was a businesswoman, professional, knowledgeable. She talked to him like a colleague, not like a potential sponsor or romantic interest. "I was in real estate in the States for 30 years, Rick said. "In Arizona. I recently sold and moved here to retire, but I am actually curious about investment opportunities here." June's eyes lit up with professional interest. "Then we should talk, but not tonight. I have 2 more meetings after this dinner. Here is my card. Call me tomorrow if you like. We can meet for coffee, and I can explain how foreign investment in Thailand works. The rules, the traps, the opportunities." Rick put the card in his pocket, impressed by her directness and professionalism. This was not a bar girl situation. This was a businesswoman who knew her value and respected her time. They spoke for another 10 minutes, mainly about real estate trends in Phuket, before June excused herself to meet other people. Rick watched her for the rest of the evening. She worked the room like an experienced networker, handing out cards, having short professional conversations, never staying with anyone long enough to seem clingy or desperate. The next morning, Rick called her. They agreed to meet at a cafe in Phuket town, away from the tourist beaches. June arrived on time, again professionally dressed, carrying a leather folder with documents. For 2 hours, she explained to Rick the complexities of foreign real estate ownership in Thailand. Foreigners could not own land, but they could own condominiums up to 49% of a building. They could control houses through Thai companies, but there were legal risks. There were loopholes, structures, ways to control property without owning it directly. June was knowledgeable without being condescending. She made no promises, pushed nothing. She educated him. Rick, who had been the expert for 30 years, enjoyed being the student, especially with someone who explained things so clearly and patiently. At the end of the coffee meeting, Rick had made no investment and handed over no money. Instead, June had said, "Think about it. Research what I told you. I do not want you to trust me blindly. If you are still interested, call me." That was exactly the right approach for someone like Rick. He had seen scammers and charlatans in the real estate business all his life. People who pushed too hard, made promises that were too big, wanted trust too quickly. June was the opposite. She was careful, professional, relaxed. Rick did his research. He spoke with other expats about foreign property ownership in Thailand. He read legal documents. Everything June had told him was true. She had not exaggerated or lied. She had informed him accurately. 2 weeks later, he called her again. Over the next 3 months, Rick met with June regularly. At first, they were business meetings. She showed him properties, introduced him to lawyers, explained different investment structures. But gradually, the meetings became more personal. June invited Rick to a networking event she was organizing. He met her colleagues, other real estate consultants, lawyers, business owners. Everything seemed legitimate. People spoke about June with respect. Her company, Phuket Property Partners, had a real office in a professional building in Phuket town. Rick began to see June as more than just a business acquaintance. She was intelligent, independent, successful. She was years younger than Rick, but she did not behave like the young Thai women he saw everywhere on the beaches with older foreigners. She paid for her own meals. She had her own life, her own career, her own goals. One evening, after a business meeting, June asked Rick if he would like to have dinner with her. Not a business dinner, just two people talking. Rick agreed. Over dinner, June told Rick about her past. She had grown up in Bangkok, the daughter of a university professor and a teacher. She had studied at Chulalongkorn University, one of Thailand's best universities, and specialized in international business. After graduating, she had worked for a multinational company in Bangkok before moving to Phuket to start her own consulting firm. She had never been married, she said. She had focused so much on her career that personal relationships had always come second. She dated occasionally, but most Thai men were intimidated by her success or expected her to give up her career to take on a more traditional role. Rick found himself connecting with June on a level he had not expected. They were both career-driven people who had prioritized work over personal relationships. They both understood the price of success. Over the next weeks, Rick and June spent more time together. They walked on beaches, ate in restaurants, visited temples and markets. It was not explicitly romantic. June always maintained a certain professional distance. But Rick felt drawn to her in a way he had not felt in years. What impressed Rick most was June's independence. She never asked for money. She paid for her own meals. Sometimes she even insisted on paying for Rick. When Rick tried to buy her gifts, she politely refused or insisted on giving him something in return. She was proud of her self-sufficiency. "I am not one of those women," she told him once when Rick tried to buy her a beautiful handbag she had admired in a store. "I earn my own money. I pay for my own things. If we are in a relationship, Rick, then it is because we like each other, not because one of us supports the other." That was exactly what Rick wanted to hear. He had heard stories from expats in Thailand whose girlfriends or wives constantly took money from them. June was different. She was his equal, not his dependent. After 4 months, in June 2024, their relationship became officially romantic. They had dinner at one of their favorite beach restaurants, and June reached across the table and took Rick's hand. "I have to tell you something," she said quietly. "I am falling in love with you." "I did not want to. It is complicated because of our business, but I cannot deny it." Rick felt his heart swell. He had not expected to find love again at this stage of life. He had resigned himself to loneliness, had thought his romantic days were over. But here was June, beautiful, intelligent, successful, independent, telling him that she was falling in love with him. "I feel the same," Rick said. "I was not looking for this. I came here to retire, not to find a relationship. But you are different from anyone I have ever met." They kissed for the first time that evening. It was tender, cautious. Two people who had both been hurt in the past and wanted to protect their hearts from more pain. In the following weeks, their relationship deepened. June introduced Rick to her closer circle of friends, mainly other business people, people who appeared professional and wealthy. Rick felt accepted into this world, the feeling that he was not just another lonely expat, but part of something. June occasionally talked about her business problems, not in a way that asked for money, only in the way someone talks about work stress. She had clients who paid late. She had deals that fell through. She had the pressure of growing her business while maintaining quality. Rick offered advice based on his own experience in business. June listened carefully and seemed to value his insight. It felt like a partnership, two business people supporting each other. During all this time, June never pushed Rick into a business investment. In fact, she seemed to keep the business and personal areas of their relationship separate. When they discussed business, she was professional. When they talked about their relationship, she was romantic. The two spheres never overlapped in a way that felt uncomfortable. But in August 2024, 6 months after Rick had met June, she casually mentioned an investment opportunity. "There is a piece of land in Kamala," June said one evening at dinner. "About 2 hectares with a sea view. The owner has to sell quickly. Family problems, debt. It is significantly undervalued. Normally, land like that would sell for 20 million baht. He wants 12. Rick was immediately interested. 12 million baht was about $300,000. A significantly undervalued piece of land with a sea view could be an excellent investment. "Why are you telling me this?" Rick asked. June shrugged. "Because you are an investor. because you have an eye for real estate values. I thought you might be interested. But if not, no problem. I have other clients who would be interested. It was perfect. June was not pushing. She was simply offering information as a business colleague, not as a girlfriend asking for money. Can I see the land? Rick asked. Of course, June said. I will arrange a viewing tomorrow. The next day, they drove to Kamala. The land was breathtaking, gently sloping, with unobstructed sea views, surrounded by lush vegetation. Rick could easily imagine several luxury villas being built there, or the whole property being resold to a developer for a large profit. Why is it so undervalued? Rick asked, always suspicious of deals that seemed too good to be true. The owner is in financial trouble, June explained. His business failed. He has personal debts. He has to sell within 30 days, or he faces foreclosure. He cannot afford to wait for a better price. It is simply timing. That made sense to Rick. He had seen similar situations in Arizona. Desperate sellers who had to sell quickly and were willing to accept discounts for immediate sales. How would the structure work? Rick asked. I cannot own land directly as a foreigner. We set up a Thai limited company, June said. You would own 49%. Thai shareholders would own 51%. But you would have preferred voting rights that give you control. This is a common structure for foreign investment. Completely legal, as long as it is documented correctly. Rick knew about this structure. June had explained it to him months earlier. There were legal risks. The Thai government had cracked down on false foreign ownership structures. But if it was done properly, with real Thai business partners and proper documentation, it could work. Who would the Thai shareholders be? Rick asked. Business partners of my company, June said. People I have worked with for years. They would be paid a small annual amount to serve as nominal shareholders. They would have no real control. You would control everything through the preferred voting rights. That was exactly the kind of arrangement Rick had read about. It was not ideal. He would have preferred to own something directly. But this was Thailand. One had to work within the legal system that existed. How much would the total investment cost? Rick asked. 12 million baht for the land, June said, plus about 1 million for legal fees, company setup, transfer fees. 13 million baht total. That is about $350,000 at the current exchange rate. Rick thought about it. That was a significant part of his savings. But if the land was really undervalued, he could make a significant profit within a year or two. He could keep it and develop it later, or sell it directly. Can I speak with the lawyers? Rick asked. Can I see the full documentation? Of course, June said. I want you to feel comfortable with everything. This is a large investment. You should get independent legal advice. That was, again, the perfect answer. June was not pushing. She was encouraging him to be careful, to do due diligence. In the following week, June arranged meetings with lawyers. They showed Rick documents, the land title deed, the proposed company structure, the legal precedents for foreign investment. Everything looked legitimate. The lawyers worked in proper offices with staff and professional facilities. They had Thai law licenses hanging on the walls. They spoke competently about Thai law and foreign investment regulations. Rick even hired his own lawyer, an English expat lawyer he had met through the networking group, to review the documents. The lawyer looked through everything and said that it seemed legitimate, although he repeated the usual warnings about the risks of foreign ownership in Thailand. "If you are going to do it," the lawyer said, "this seems as well structured as anything I have seen in Thailand. The legal work is solid. The paper trail is clear. The biggest risks are regulatory. If the government changes the laws, but that is a risk with any foreign investment here." That was the confirmation Rick needed. He decided to invest. At the beginning of September, Rick transferred $350,000 into an escrow account at a Thai bank. The money was supposed to be held there until all documentation was completed and then released to the seller. June was professional throughout the entire process. She ran everything through the proper channels: banks, lawyers, trustees. Nothing was paid to her personally. Everything went through official business structures. The company setup took 2 weeks. Rick signed documents in law offices. He met the Thai nominal shareholders, 3 business people connected to June's company. They seemed legitimate, talked about being involved in other real estate projects. Then, at the end of September, June said that the deal was complete. The land now belonged to the company, and Rick controlled the company through his preferred shares. She handed him a folder with all the documents: the company registration, the land title deed, the shareholder agreements. Rick felt satisfied and excited. He had made a significant investment in Thailand. Through a corporate structure, he owned a beautiful piece of land. He was no longer just a retiree living in Phuket. He was an investor and businessman. But Rick had no idea that he had just stepped into the perfect trap, meticulously built over months by professionals who had done this hundreds of times before. Every element was designed to build trust and remove skepticism. Every step was calculated to pull him deeper. 1 month after the first deal was completed, in October 2024, June mentioned another opportunity. "Do you remember the Kamala land?" she said. "The neighboring owner also wants to sell. 3 hectares directly next to your land. If you bought both, you would have 5 connected hectares. That would be much more valuable for development." Rick was interested. The logic was solid. Larger connected plots of land were indeed disproportionately more valuable than smaller separate ones. "How much?" he asked. 18 million baht, June said. "But because it borders your land and because you already have the company structure set up, the legal costs would be minimal. Maybe 19 million total. That is about $500,000. Rick hesitated. That would be almost all of his remaining liquid funds. He would still have his investments and his Social Security, but not much cash buffer. "That is a lot of money," Rick said. "I know," June said. "I am not pushing. I am only telling you that the opportunity exists. If it does not feel right to you, just leave it. Someone else will buy it." But Rick could not ignore the opportunity. 5 connected hectares with a sea view would be an extraordinary asset. He could develop a luxury resort or sell it to a major developer for an enormous profit. He spoke with his lawyer, who again reviewed the documents. Everything looked good. The seller was real. The land was real. The legal structure was solid. Rick made a decision. He would invest. At the end of October 2024, he transferred another $450,000. Together with his first investment, he had now put $800,000 of his million into Thai real estate. June was thrilled for him. One day, you will look back at these investments and realize that they changed your life, she said. You are not just a retiree living in Thailand. You are a serious investor. You are building real wealth. Rick felt proud. He had made a bold move. He had taken a risk. That was what successful people did. They saw opportunities and seized them. His relationship with June blossomed. They spent most evenings together. They talked about the future, perhaps getting married one day, perhaps developing more properties together. Rick felt that he had found not only a partner, but a true life partner. In November, June went on a business trip to Bangkok. She had to meet investors, she said, and government officials about permits for other projects. She would be gone for 10 days. Rick missed her, but he was busy exploring Phuket and socializing with other expats. He assumed June would come back, and their life would continue as before. But after several days in Bangkok, June's calls stopped. Her line messages were no longer answered. Rick tried to reach her, but there was no response. At first, Rick was not overly worried. Maybe she was busy in meetings. Maybe her phone was not working. But after 2 days without contact, fear began to creep in. Rick called June's office. The person who answered said June was not available. He tried again the next day. Same answer. He went to the office in Phuket town in person. The office was open, but June was not there. The receptionist, whom he had met several times, looked nervous when Rick asked about June. She is in Bangkok, the receptionist said. Business meetings. I do not know when she will return. Can you connect me with her? Rick asked. I have not been able to reach her for several days. The receptionist hesitated. I will tell her that you were here. Rick left, feeling uneasy for the first time. Something did not feel right. June had never gone days without communication. Even when she was busy, she sent text messages or made short calls. He waited 2 more days. Still nothing. Rick decided to fly to Bangkok and find June. He knew she was staying at the Shangri-La Hotel. She had mentioned that during business trips before. Rick flew to Bangkok and went to the Shangri-La. He asked at the reception desk for June, using both her nickname and her formal name, Fichaya. We have no guest by that name, the receptionist said. She may have already checked out, Rick said. Was she here last week? The receptionist checked the system. No, sir. No one by that name has stayed here in the last 2 weeks. Rick felt panic rising. If June was not at the Shangri-La, where was she? He tried other hotels, calling around and using June's name, but no one had any record of her. Rick flew back to Phuket, feeling sick with worry. He went to June's office again. This time, the office was empty, not closed for the day, but completely empty. No furniture, no staff, no equipment, only an empty room. Rick stared through the glass door and felt his heart race. How could an entire office disappear? Overnight, he ran to the landlord's office in the same building. What happened to Phuket Property Partners? Rick asked. They moved out, said the property manager. 3 days ago. They terminated their lease and moved out. Did they say where they were going? Rick asked desperately. No. They simply paid what they owed and left. Rick felt his stomach sink. This could not be happening. This was not real. This was June's business. This was her life. She could not simply have disappeared. But when Rick tried to reach her, by phone, email, line, Facebook, everything was either disconnected or deleted. It was as if June Thonglaw had never existed. That was the moment Rick knew. He had been scammed. June was not a businesswoman. She was not a girlfriend. She was a fraudster, and she had disappeared with $800,000 of his savings. But Rick still had no idea how much worse it would become. Rick went to the police in Phuket. He brought all his documents, the investment contracts, the company registrations, the land title deeds, the bank transfers. He explained the entire situation. The police officers listened politely. They took notes, but Rick could see in their eyes that they had heard this 100 times before. "This is fairly common," one of the officers said in broken English. "Many foreigners become involved in real estate fraud. We will investigate." But he did not finish the sentence. Rick understood. The chances of getting his money back were practically zero. Rick also went to his lawyer, the expat lawyer who had reviewed the documents. The lawyer looked through everything again and became more concerned the more he read. "The documents look real," the lawyer said. "But I want to check the actual land registrations with the land office." They went to the land office together. That was where the true disaster began to unfold. The first property, the Kamala land, for which Rick had paid $350,000, existed. But it did not belong to the company Rick controlled through his shares. It belonged to a completely different company, registered at an address in Bangkok. "This must be a mistake," Rick said. "Maybe the registration is not completed yet." But the land office official shook his head. The registration was completed in August. "The land belongs to Thai Property Holdings Limited." "Is that your company?" "No," Rick said weakly. "My company is Phuket Land Investment Limited." They checked the second property. Same result. The land existed, but it did not belong to Rick's company. It belonged to another company he had never heard of. Rick felt his heart race. "I do not understand. I have title deeds. I have company registrations. How can this not be mine?" His lawyer looked increasingly pale. "The documents you have are either forged or they are for another transaction. The land you paid for belongs to someone else." Rick stood there at the land office and felt the walls closing in around him. He had paid $800,000 for land he did not own. The land existed, but it belonged to someone he had never met. Worse still, as his lawyer dug deeper, they discovered something even more disturbing. The company Rick thought he controlled through preferred shares, Phuket Land Investment Limited, existed. But not only did it own no land, it had been used in several large financial transactions during the previous month. Money transfers worth several $1,000,000 had passed through company accounts. "Do you understand what this means?" Rick's lawyer said seriously. "But someone is using your company to move money. You are the registered director. On paper, you are approving these transactions." Rick felt his blood turn to ice. "But I did not approve any of this. I knew nothing about these transactions." "That will not matter if the authorities investigate," the lawyer said. "On paper, you are the responsible person. Your name is on the documents. Your signature is on the company records." Rick spent the next days trying to understand the full scope of his situation. He had not only lost $800,000 to fraud, he had been involved in a criminal enterprise without knowing it. His name, his signatures, his identity had been used to create a shell company used for money laundering. June, or whoever she really was, had not only stolen his money, she had stolen his identity. She had created companies in his name. She had used his details to open bank accounts. She had implicated him in international crimes. Rick's lawyer advised him to go to the tourist police, a special unit that deals with crimes against foreigners, and report everything fully. Rick did so, bringing every document he had. The tourist police took his report seriously. They began investigating and contacted international law enforcement agencies for help. Within weeks, Rick received the terrible news. He had become part of a major international money laundering investigation. At first, the authorities believed Rick was a participant, not a victim. His name was on the company documents. His signatures were on the bank records. He had transferred large sums of money into these companies. From the authorities' perspective, Rick looked like an American businessman involved in money laundering. "You are under investigation," his lawyer said grimly, "both by Thai authorities and probably by U.S. authorities. Your name has appeared in several suspicious transactions. You must prove that you are a victim, not a participant." Rick felt his world collapse. He had not only lost his money, he had not only lost his girlfriend, who had never really been his girlfriend. He had potentially lost his freedom. He was facing the real possibility of being charged with crimes he had not committed. In the following weeks, Rick desperately tried to prove his innocence. He gathered every text, every email, every record, every interaction with June. He worked with his lawyer to create a comprehensive timeline showing that he had been a victim, not a participant. But the evidence against him looked damning. His name was on company documents. His signatures were on bank records. He had transferred large sums of money. From the perspective of an investigator who knew nothing about the background story, Rick looked like a criminal. Worse still, as the authorities dug deeper, they discovered that June Tonglaw did not exist. The name on her business card, Phachaya Tonglaw, was false. No person with that name had graduated from Chulalongkorn University. No person with that name was licensed as a real estate consultant. The person Rick knew as June was a complete invention. The Thai lawyers Rick had met, the offices, the staff, the licenses hanging on the walls were also part of the fraud. The offices had been rented short-term. The licenses were forged. The staff were paid actors. Even the other investors Rick had met at networking events, the people who had spoken about working with June and Phuket property partners, were part of the facade. They were either accomplices in the fraud or unsuspecting victims who had been manipulated to appear legitimate. The entire structure, the businesses, the lawyers, the offices, the documents, had been an elaborate scam built over months to appear perfectly legitimate. Rick, with all his business experience and skepticism, had been completely fooled. The investigation dragged on for months. Rick had to stay in Phuket. His passport was confiscated by the Thai authorities while the investigation continued. He could not return to America, even if he wanted to. He was trapped. Rick now lived in a much cheaper apartment in Hua Hin, about 200 kilometers north of Phuket. He did not have enough money to stay in his beautiful villa. About 80% of his savings were gone. He still had about $200,000 left. His investments, each emergency savings, money he had not put into the Thai real estate. The legal costs for his defense were substantial. Rick had to pay both a Thai lawyer and an international lawyer specializing in cross-border financial crime. The fees quickly added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Rick spent his days working with lawyers, speaking with investigators, and desperately trying to find out what had happened to June and whether there was any way to get his money back. Through the investigation, Rick learned the shocking truth about the scale of the operation. June, or whoever she really was part of a sophisticated criminal organization operating across Southeast Asia. They targeted wealthy expats, built trust and relationships over months, and then used their victims' identities to create shell companies for money laundering. The romantic relationship was not accidental. It was a calculated strategy. By making Rick fall in love with her, June removed his skepticism and made it seem natural that she was including him in business opportunities. Rick had never been just a business client. He had been a target from the beginning, selected because his profile fit perfectly. Successful, wealthy, lonely, new to Thailand, looking for investment opportunities and personal connection. Rick also learned that he was not the only victim. The authorities had identified at least 6 other men who had been scammed according to similar patterns. Different women, different business fronts, but the same basic operation. All the victims were middle-aged or older expat men. All had invested significant sums, and all had their identities stolen for criminal purposes. The total amount stolen in this operation alone was estimated at more than $5 million. And that was only one network. The authorities believed that several such networks were operating across Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Rick felt both relieved and horrified. Relieved because he was not the only one who had been fooled, which meant perhaps he had not been stupid or crazy. Horrified because it meant this was a large, organized criminal enterprise, and the chances of getting justice or recovering his money were extremely low. Months passed. Rick's investigation moved forward only slowly. The Thai authorities were overwhelmed with cases. The international law enforcement agencies were more interested in dismantling the criminal organization than helping individual victims get their money back. Rick was eventually classified as a victim, not a participant, but the process had taken 7 months. 7 months during which he did not know whether he would end up in prison for crimes he had not committed. Even after he was cleared, Rick's passport remained confiscated for several more months while the investigation continued. He could not leave Thailand. He was trapped in a kind of legal limbo, not charged, but not free either. Rick lived in fear that every day more incriminating evidence might appear that would make him a suspect again. He could barely sleep. He lost weight. He became depressed and isolated. The psychological burden was overwhelming. Rick had not only lost his money, he had lost his trust, his self-esteem, his sense of judgment. He had loved a woman who had never existed. He had believed in a life that had been a complete lie. In March 2025, about 1 year after Rick had met June, he finally got his passport back. The investigation was not yet complete, But the Thai authorities had definitively determined that Rick was a victim, not a criminal. Rick could have returned to America. But to what? He had sold his house. His business was gone. His friends had moved on. And honestly, Rick was ashamed. Ashamed that he had been fooled so completely. Ashamed that he had lost $800,000 to a scam. Ashamed that he had fallen in love with a woman who had never existed. So Rick stayed in Hua Hin and lived off his remaining savings, about $100,000 after legal fees and living costs had been paid. With his Social Security and careful spending, he could survive, but it was a sharply reduced life compared to what he had imagined. Rick joined a support group for fraud victims, a group of expats who had fallen victim to different scams in Thailand. The stories were heartbreaking. Men who had lost life savings to fake investments. Men who had been robbed by women they loved. Men whose identities had been stolen for criminal purposes. Rick learned that his story was widespread. Thailand, with its large expat population, friendly culture, and complex legal system, had become a hotspot for sophisticated fraud. The criminals were constantly evolving, becoming more professional, and targeting victims more carefully. Rick found some comfort in the support group. These men understood what he had gone through. They did not judge. They shared their own stories of betrayal and loss. They helped one another cope. One of the men in the group, a British expat named Roger, had gone through an experience similar to Rick's. He had lost £200,000, about $300,000, in a real estate scam carried out by a woman he had considered a friend. His story was so similar to Rick's that it was unsettling. The gradual building of trust, the seemingly legitimate business opportunities, the sudden disappearance. They are professionals, Roger told Rick at one of their meetings. They studies us. They learn what we want. Connection, purpose, excitement. Then they give us exactly that while they systematically destroy us. It is not your fault, mate. She was simply better at deception than you were at detecting it. That perspective helped Rick somewhat. He was not stupid. He was not naive. He had simply gone up against a professional criminal who was better at deception than he was at recognizing it. Rick also learned that there were occasional breakthroughs in prosecuting these networks. Some of the criminals had been caught and prosecuted, but some victims recovered small portions of their money when assets were seized. The success rate was low, but not zero. In June, Rick received surprising news from the international authorities. A woman matching June's description had been arrested in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, while trying to scam another wealthy expat. She had used a false ID, but fingerprints connected her to several fraud cases, including Rick's. Rick felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that she had been caught, anger over what she had done, and strangely, a kind of painful nostalgia for the person he had thought she was. The woman was questioned, but she revealed little. She also claimed to be a victim, forced by a larger criminal network. The authorities did not believe her story. She had clearly played an important role in several scams. But without greater cooperation from her, it was difficult to make further progress. Even more frustrating was that, within weeks of her arrest, the woman was released on bail and disappeared. The Malaysian legal process had been slow, and she had apparently escaped before a trial could begin. She was now in the wind, probably with a new identity, looking for new victims to scam. Rick was devastated. The one person he wanted to hold accountable had escaped. The justice he had longed for had not materialized. He tried to come to terms with the reality that he would probably never get his money back. The funds June had stolen had been laundered through various accounts and countries. Tracing them would be practically impossible. Rick settled into life in Hua Hin. He taught English 3 times a week at a local school to supplement his income. He volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends and found comfort in caring for abandoned dogs and cats. He went to the support group every Thursday evening. His days were quiet and predictable. He lived modestly, carefully managing his remaining savings. He had friends among the other expats, mainly other men who had suffered losses and understood the special kind of pain that comes from being so completely deceived. Rick tried not to hate Thailand itself. It was not the country's fault that he had been scammed. Criminals exist everywhere. But Thailand was forever stained for him. The beautiful beaches reminded him of walks with June. The restaurants reminded him of their dinners. Whole experience of living in Thailand was threaded with pain. Sometimes Rick wondered who June really was. Did she have a real family, real friends? Had any part of her personality, her intelligence, her charm, her conversations been real? Or had everything been a deception, a role played by a professional fraudster? He would never know. The person he knew as June Tonglaw had been an invention, carefully constructed to appeal to him and then destroy him. Whoever she really was, she had disappeared into the shadows, leaving only destruction in her wake. The financial impact of Rick's loss was significant, but the psychological scars were deeper. Rick struggled with intense paranoia and trust issues. He questioned every interaction, suspected malicious intent behind every kindness. He was afraid of relationships. Even platonic friendships felt risky. What if this person was only being friendly to manipulate him? What if this dinner invitation was actually a trap? What if everyone he met was just another June, waiting for their chance? Rick's self-esteem was shattered. He had been a successful businessman, confident in his judgment and his ability to read people. But June had fooled him so completely. She had manipulated him for months without him noticing any red flags. How could he ever trust his own judgment again? Rick went to therapy with an English-speaking psychologist in Bangkok, whom he visited twice a month. The therapy sessions helped somewhat. They helped him frame his experience as trauma that needed professional treatment, not as personal failure. "You were attacked by experts," the therapist explained. "People trained in psychological manipulation who build trust and then exploit it. This is no different from being overpowered by a physical attacker. Blaming yourself does not help." But despite the therapeutic framework, Rick still struggled. At night, he dreamed of June, sometimes beautiful dreams in which they were still together, followed by the painful awakening into reality. Other times, he had nightmares about arrest, prison, being accused of crimes he had not committed. Rick's relationship with his family in America was strained. He had told them about the fraud, but they could not really understand what he had gone through. His sister had asked, "But how could you not see this coming?" His brother had said, "You should have asked us before investing so much money." Their comments, although they came from concern, felt like judgment. Rick felt alienated from the people who knew him best. He could not help them understand how sophisticated the scam had been, how many layers of legitimacy had been created, how completely June had manipulated him. To them, it simply sounded as if Rick had been stupid, which made his pain even worse. Rick mostly stayed within expat circles in Hua Hin, where many other men had similar stories of loss and fraud. These men did not judge. They understood the particular dangers of being a foreigner in Thailand, the language barriers, the cultural differences, the legal complexities that make it so easy to be exploited. One positive aspect of Rick's experience was his work with the support group. He became an informal speaker and told his story to new members, helped them process their own experiences, and offered practical advice for dealing with legal and financial consequences. The most important thing is not to be ashamed. Rick often told newcomers, "You did nothing wrong. You trusted someone who proved unworthy of that trust. That does not make you stupid or naive. It makes you human. The shame belongs to the criminals, not to the victims." Rick also helped with fraud prevention seminars for expats, supported by local police and international embassies. They educated newcomers about common scams, warning signs, legal traps, and ways to protect themselves. This work gave Rick some sense of purpose. He could not undo his painful experience, but perhaps he could help others avoid the same fate. If his story saved one person from being fooled, then perhaps something good had come from his catastrophe. But despite these positive efforts, Rick's days were plagued by regret and what-if thoughts. What if he had not come to Thailand? What if he had never mixed June's business and personal relationships? What if he had done more due diligence or consulted another lawyer? Rick knew these thoughts were not helpful, but he could not stop them. His mind constantly ran through the past, searching for the moment when everything had gone wrong, the point where he could have made a different decision that would have changed everything. The truth was that there was no single moment. June had systematically manipulated him over months. Every step had been carefully planned to appear natural and legitimate. Rick had made decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. It was only in hindsight, with full knowledge of the fraud, that the red flags became obvious. In October 2025, about 2 years after Rick had met June, he received one last significant piece of news. An international law enforcement officer contacted him to inform him that June's criminal network had been partially dismantled. Several members had been arrested in different Southeast Asian countries. Bank accounts had been frozen, and some assets had been seized. But June herself remained at large. She had disappeared after her release in Malaysia and had not yet resurfaced. The authorities believed that she was either operating under a new identity or hiding abroad. Rick had mixed feelings about this news. He was glad that some justice had been done, that other members of the network had been caught. But he was disappointed that June, the person who had directly destroyed his life, had escaped. The seized assets would eventually be distributed among the victims, the officer said. But Rick should not expect a full recovery. The recovered funds would be millions of dollars, less than what had been stolen in total. In fact, about 6 months later, Rick received a notice that he would receive $25,000 from seized assets. It was better than nothing. It was about 3% of his loss, but it was hardly a meaningful recovery. Still, it was something. Rick printed the newspaper article Roger had sent him and kept it in a folder with all the other documents from his case. Proof that he had not imagined all of it, that he was not crazy or stupid, that he had been victimized by a real criminal organization. Rick Holloway is now 63 years old. 3 years have passed since he stood in front of that empty office in Phuket and realized that his $400,000 were gone. He still lives in Hua Hin, in the same modest apartment, living carefully on his reduced savings and social security. His life is now small, measured, and quiet. He teaches English 3 times a week at the local school. He volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. He attends the support group for fraud victims every Thursday evening. He has found a few friends among the expat community, other men who have suffered losses, and understand what it feels like to be so completely deceived. Rick's story illustrates a disturbing evolution in Thailand scams. June was not merely a romance scammer looking for quick money. She was part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that combined romance fraud with identity theft and money laundering. Her operation was carefully planned, professionally executed, and devastatingly effective. The romance was the bait, but the real crime was much larger. By stealing Rick's identity and creating shell companies in his name, June's organization could launder money for other criminal enterprises. Rick was not only a fraud victim. He was unknowingly transformed into a participant in international crime, and he nearly lost his freedom along with his savings. According to Thai authorities and international law enforcement agencies, this type of sophisticated fraud is becoming increasingly common. Criminal organizations target expats, not only for their money, but for their identities, their passports, their banking information, their credibility as Western business people. These identities are then used to create legitimate-looking corporate structures that facilitate money laundering on a large scale. Rick's case helped expose one such network, but the authorities believe many more exist. The combination of romance, false business opportunities, and identity theft creates a perfect storm that can destroy victims financially, legally, and psychologically. She did not just steal my money, Rick says quietly when he shares his story with newcomers in the support group. She stole my name. She stole my identity. She made me a suspect. For 7 months, I did not know whether I would end up in prison for crimes I did not commit. The $400,000, that was devastating, but the identity theft was worse. It robbed me of everything I thought I knew about myself, about my judgment, about my ability to navigate the world safely. The psychological scars are deep. Rick admits that he now has difficulty trusting anyone, especially women. He has closed himself off emotionally, afraid that every kindness or interest from others could be manipulation. He double-checks every interaction, questions every motive, suspects every friendship. I have become paranoid, Rick admits. I know it is not healthy, but after what happened with June, after being so completely deceived by someone I thought I knew, I cannot help it. I question everything. His relationship with Thailand itself is complicated. He stays because, with his reduced savings, he cannot afford to live as well elsewhere. But the country that once represented paradise and possibilities now represents loss and betrayal. Every beautiful beach reminds him of walks with June. Every nice restaurant reminds him of dinners where he thought he was falling in love. Every successful-looking Thai businesswoman makes him wonder whether she is just another creditor searching for the next victim. Rick sometimes thinks about the warning signs he missed. June's reluctance to introduce him to her family. Her vague answers about her past. The way she separated their personal relationship from the business investment. Something he had interpreted as professionalism, but which was really compartmentalization to avoid emotional complications. But most signs were not there. June was a professional criminal, trained and experienced in manipulation. She did not fit the typical profile, and that was exactly what made her dangerous. She was educated, refined, patient. She invested months in the fraud. She never directly asked for money. She made everything look like Rick's idea, his choice, his decision. That is what makes it so hard to accept, Rick says. If she had obviously been a scammer, if she had asked for money immediately, if she had faked some family emergency, if she had pushed too hard too fast, I would have seen it. But she was smarter than that. She built real trust over time. She made me believe I had found something rare and genuine. That is what skilled manipulation looks like, and it is almost impossible to defend against. The other men in the support group nod in recognition. They all have stories of sophisticated scams that did not follow the usual patterns. The criminals are evolving, getting better, targeting victims more carefully, and carrying out their fraud more professionally. Rick has tried to rebuild a piece of normal life, but he knows he will never fully recover. The financial loss means that he must work longer, save more carefully, constantly worry about unexpected expenses. At 60, he should be enjoying his retirement. Instead, he teaches English for extra income and volunteers to fill the lonely hours. The psychological loss is harder to quantify, but perhaps more damaging. Rick lost his confidence, his judgment, his ability to trust. He lost his dreams of an adventurous retirement. He lost his dignity during those 7 months of investigation. He lost parts of himself that he will never get back. People ask me why I do not simply go back to America, Rick says. But where would I go? I sold everything to come here. I no longer have a house, no longer have a business. Most of my friends have moved on with their lives. And honestly, I am ashamed. I am ashamed that I was fooled so completely, that I lost so much, that I almost ended up in prison for crimes I did not commit. It is easier to hide here, where most people do not know my story. Rick stays in Hua Hin. In his modest apartment, he lives his reduced life. He helps Thai children learn English. He feeds and cares for rescued dogs and cats at the animal shelter. He shares his story with other victims in the hope of helping them process their own trauma. He counts his remaining savings and prays that they will last. Every few months, Rick receives updates from international authorities about the investigations into June's criminal network. A few more victims have been identified. A few minor accomplices have been arrested. But June herself disappeared again after her brief arrest in Malaysia. She is somewhere out there, probably with a new name, a new identity, targeting a new victim. She did not just steal my money, Rick repeats, because it is the truth people need to understand. She stole my name, my identity, my reputation. She turned my dream retirement into a nightmare. She took everything I had worked for over 30 years and destroyed it in less than a year. The $400,000 was only money. What she really took was my sense of self, my ability to trust, my future. That is what makes this story worse than simple fraud. It is not just about money. It is about identity theft, about being turned into something you are not, about losing yourself completely to someone else's criminal agenda. Rick's story is a cautionary tale, not only about romance scams or investment fraud, but about the evolving sophistication of international crime. As more retirees move abroad seeking better lives, more criminals are developing elaborate systems to exploit them. The combination of romance, false business opportunities, and identity theft creates a perfect trap that is extremely difficult to recognize and almost impossible to escape once you are caught. For Rick Holloway, the lesson came too late and cost too much. He sits in his apartment in Hua Hin, 3 years older and infinitely sadder than the confident businessman who first came to Thailand with $1 million and a dream. The money is mostly gone. The dream is dead. The man who had everything lost everything, including himself, to a woman who was never who she pretended to be. She did not just steal my money, Rick said once more, as if the repetition could somehow make senseless meaningful. She stole my name, and in that simple statement lies the full horror of what happened to Richard Holloway in Thailand. Not just a financial crime, but an existential one that left him permanently diminished, forever changed, and eternally suspicious of the world and everyone in it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel for more true stories about sophisticated scams and the real cost of misplaced trust. Share this video with anyone who could benefit from hearing it. Sometimes the greatest protection against fraud is simply knowing how advanced and professional it has become. Thank you for watching.